So we are on to the final talk of today before we execute on our earlier promise and give you more food and drink. So the last talk is Kevin Steele, the district attorney in Montgomery County, the newly re-elected district attorney from Montgomery County, Pennsylvania. It's been our great pleasure to partner with the Montgomery County DA's office for quite a while on a variety of initiatives. And they're going to be here today talking about some policies that they've worked on for I think a kind of a public health and crime challenge that a lot of jurisdictions around the country are facing, opioid addiction. So let me get you your slides. Okay, that'll work. Right. You guys, your mics are on right now.
All right, so I'm sorry to not get in here with a real happy topic at the end of the day on things, and I know it's keeping you from libations that John will provide later, but I want to spend a little time here this afternoon and talk about a topic that I think everybody in the nation is facing, and talk about some of the things that we have done, and hopefully share some efforts that are being done in different places, because what I will tell you about this is that I'm willing to try just about anything to save lives. And that's really what we're talking about here today, and coming up with ways to do it, because unfortunately we are living in a time where so many people are being affected, and I can't go many places, and I'm sure most of you can't go many places where somebody isn't touched with this and somebody's family is not affected. So, what do we do about it? How can we try to address this in ways to curb this tide of death that we're facing? And with me, I brought a couple people that are on the ground dealing with this on an everyday basis. So our Assistant Chief, Tanya Lupinacci, is here, and Tanya left me for a little while, was raising her 3 sons, and I persuaded her to come back and delve into this issue for us. She'd been the captain of our narcotics unit, and we needed to do some things that were out of the box, and she led a lot of these efforts. And then the other fellow here, Lieutenant Paul Bradbury. Paul's in charge of our narcotics enforcement team, and I think it's important to know a little bit of Paul's background. He was a police officer with one of our larger departments for many years, and then came with us in the district attorney's office as a homicide investigator. And when the opportunity and what we felt needed to be made in terms of some changes in how we were addressing this issue, and it'll be kind of second half on things, is we needed a homicide investigator to run our narcotics unit, because we had to look at these cases differently. And so we'll talk about how that's being done and some of the efforts that we've made. But as many of the prosecutors know in here, it's very important to surround yourself with really good people that are doing this and doing this at a high level. And I can't be more proud of the 2 of them and the efforts that they've made along these lines. So when we talk about this crisis that we're that we're facing, I say consistently that this is our number one issue. Of all the issues that we're facing in our jurisdictions, and I'll give you some of what we're looking at, and so you have background on why we're dealing with it in the fashion that we are. But we in Montgomery County, and for those that aren't familiar with the area and that came from places like California, and we're west of the city of Philadelphia. And the city of Philadelphia has a particular area called Kensington, which is a little bit of the epicenter of the crisis. And that's where we see a lot of our heroin, our fentanyl coming from. And I'll preface that with we're seeing coming from different ways, and we'll get into that a little bit. But because of our close proximity to this, we've seen a lot of death as a result of narcotics that come from there. And when we're looking at it and looking at how we can address it to save lives, I'll tell you a couple reasons why it distresses me and keeps me up at night, and and when we're looking at how to deal with this, the folks that end up going down these tracks have such a difficult time, and their families tell you that they're not themselves anymore, that they're always just trying to get that high, and they're doing things that they would not have otherwise done. And I had a talk recently with a couple of our investigators on a case that we have, and a couple, husband and wife, were both addicted to heroin and using fentanyl, and they were taking turns who would shoot up and then watch the other die and then give them Narcan and bring them back. And this was documented in our investigation. So when you look at somebody getting to that level of where their lives are, I get really distressed on how we can try to address this in some way to curb the deaths. So I'll give you a little background that comes from our jurisdiction on what we're looking at in terms of some of the statistics and numbers. And I know there's probably a lot of folks in here that are seeing a lot more than we are, but the way this went for us is back in 2002 we had 39 too many people die from overdoses, but then it steadily went up, and then in 07 we went to 111, and then in 12 we go to 144, 13 150, 14 161, 15 177, and then you see where it shot up even more dramatically to 249, down slightly to 245, and then in 18, 210 lives were lost to overdose. And behind the numbers that we talk about is individuals, brothers, sisters, sons, daughters, that are lost because of this. And when we look at what we are facing specifically now, and the trend that we're seeing goes to the fentanyl aspects of it. And we use this slide to address something that's 40 or 50 times more deadly than heroin. And the potency that we're seeing on this, and with both heroin and fentanyl, I assume a lot of jurisdictions have had to go to the same things that we have with this, where we can't even let our police officers field test anymore because of how deadly this is. And you close a bag and there's a poof, and all of a sudden that officer needs Narcan or they're dead, because of how potent this is. We've gone to the point where the canine handlers carry Narcan for the dogs, because if they sniff it, they're going down. So really, really deadly stuff. And what we've seen over the past few years, and you can see in this chart, is the overdose deaths that we just talked about, but how fentanyl is a part of more and more of them. And we're not looking good this year, and we're looking at it going up again. So 2015, 20% are fentanyl related. 2016, 43% fentanyl related. 2017, 68% fentanyl related. 2018, 72% fentanyl related. And I believe, and Paul, correct me if I'm wrong, that it's going to be even a higher number this year that are fentanyl-related deaths. So how do we do this, and how do we look at what to do as prosecutors? And I think, many of us in this room, look at this and realize that this isn't necessarily something that we're going to be able to arrest our way out of. So we got to look at it in a whole bunch of different ways. And there's different prongs and ways to address it. I don't think one is exclusive of the other. So I'll touch on a few of the things that we're working on before we get into drug delivery resulting in death and those charges. But we're trying to work on all different levels in our communities, and we're working in education. We're working to try to get the word out on this. We're using that bully pulpit we have as prosecutors to make sure people know that naloxone is available and that saves lives. We use our drug forfeiture money to buy naloxone, and are doing things to try to make sure that people can save themselves. Now, although I discourage what the husband and wife were talking about, that's not the way to go. So when we're looking at how to address some of these, we're working along county, state, and federal. We're working with all those partners to try to address each of those. I threw up a slide here on a case I prosecuted a couple years back. This was batteries being manufactured in Mexico, 3 kilos of heroin in each of them. A fellow from Norristown drove down to Atlanta, would switch the battery out, working batteries, drive back up, switch the car again in Norristown, take it up to the Bronx, and deliver it, and then the money runs coming back. We were able to arrest and prosecute, and there wasn't like some button on those batteries. It had to be taken apart with a saw to get into the heroin. But the significance of this, and I think the importance of it, is working with a lot of different agencies to do something like this. I mean, we're local DA's office. How are we going to address this with the state partners that we worked on, with state police and the Attorney General's office? We worked with the DEA in New York and Atlanta, and we worked with our federal partners on this and do throughout, and I think that's important. I stood with the U.S. Attorney from the Eastern District recently, where we had a former deputy sheriff who was getting fentanyl sent from China and then distributing it across the nation. It was tracked to a number of deaths and tracked to China, and the indictment came on 3 Chinese nationals. Whether we ever get them back or not is a different story, but we put the word out on where this is coming, and it was coming through the mail. So it's working with the different partners to try to address this in any way we can. And it goes beyond law enforcement. We're working in our communities with treatment providers, and we're working with the hospitals along this, working within our court system, working with our public defender's office in a number of different programs. 14, we started a drug task force that is a working group within the county family, but also we brought in every partner we could think of in this: pharmaceutical, hospitals, and coroner, police, and getting everybody to the table to try to come up with different recommendations, and some of which have been very helpful to what we've been doing moving forward here. Naloxone and getting it in the first responders' hands. That was big, and we actually got some pushback in the beginning on that because we have a very robust ambulance corps in the area, and people said, well, the ambulance will be here, and we said, well, what if they're not? And then we showed the chart of the families or all the places where overdoses were occurring in the county to the police chiefs, and nobody could say that it wasn't happening in their jurisdiction. So are you going to be able to tell that family, oh, well, we didn't take this naloxone, and so we're just going to wait for somebody to come, and then when their child dies or somebody dies? So everybody's on board now, and that's been really, really successful. I put the numbers up here, and these are just police saves, okay? Just police saves in our jurisdiction on naloxone, and I like to look at this and think about it like that's a lot more lives that would be on that other chart if we hadn't been doing this and hadn't been working along those lines. So saving lives, and again, that's what we're looking at in each of these projects we're doing. All right, so I'm assuming a lot of you are doing this. We try to have a little fun with this a couple times a year. We have a great administrative assistant in our office that's very creative. And so for drug take-back days, we get a new poster each time. We unveil it and we put it out there, and we try to draw attention to it. And all our police departments have people that are out there, collecting drugs, and people coming by because, one, we want to get them out of the medicine cabinet. Two, we don't want them in our water system, right? So we're getting that message out to get them to us, and we'll destroy them safely. Now, we're proud of what we've done with this. We're proud of all the drugs that we've destroyed because they're drugs that are not going to be in some kid's hands when they go into the medicine cabinet, right? But the scary part of this is how many drugs are out there. All these drugs getting destroyed means there's way too much overprescribing going on. So you got to address that too. And when we do this and we have these drug boxes that are available 24/7 in every single one of the police departments. We have it in the courthouse. We have it in our couple of the medical facilities that we have in the hospitals. And I always get the folks that say, well, could you put it like at the grocery store or outside there so that we can access it more easily? No. I don't want to see one of those boxes getting dragged down the street, behind some car. So they're in the police department, and we're going to make sure that we have this in a good way. But the take-back days, we are going out there, and there's police officers out at the local grocery store and doing things. So then we got a little more creative with it, and off of one of these posters that came off on bad meds, we got a car, a Mini Cooper that I fit into. I've driven this thing. One of my defense attorney friends saw me on the street, and I rolled down the window, and he said, "That's about the last person I expected to see in that car." It's great. It brings attention. We take it to the senior homes, all right? There's a lot of drugs in those homes. You know, that's a way to get it out. And folks say, "Hey, I may need it at some point." No, you don't. You'll get a new prescription if you do. Let's get it out of there. So we take it there. We take it to national nights out. We put it in parades. It's all an attempt to bring more attention on this, so that we can hopefully save lives. The prevention efforts, right? The best way we're going about this is having somebody not go down this track. So we're out there in the schools, and we do this with our prosecutors. We take our detectives out there, but I'll tell you who's more effective than any of us when we talk to these kids. And that's a parent who has lost one of their children. And these folks do this, and it's really, really hard. There's one lady who has done probably 40 or 50 of these with me, and she cries every time. And I cry, because she's laying it all out there. But afterwards, when the kids are coming up and hugging her, and when they're talking to her about their lives, you know it's making an effect. And maybe, just maybe, that's somebody that's not going down this track. Our drug courts and, you know, our some of our alternative programs on this. Our drug court has been very, very successful, and it has saved a lot of lives. It's hard to go through. It's long, but it's something that, you know, our public defender's office, our prosecutors, our probation department work very hard on, because everybody has that same goal of saving lives through this. So we put a lot of resources into it, but it's something that we're proud of how it has gone. We also have some diversionary programs that we're working. You know, one we call it Deat. It's drug education awareness program, Deat, and that's for young folks that are kind of past our youth aid panels. It's 18 to 24, first-time offenders. They never go into the system. They, you know, have to go through these programs with us. We've had some good success there. We're also 2 places in the state that have a TOPS program. It's called Targeted Opioid Prevention, and that's for folks between arrest and when they're going to court. And we've had no deaths for people that have gotten into this program and working it. So stay tuned. It seems to be working, and we're going to continue down this track. You know, we also became a high-intensity drug trafficking area, and our focus through this, beyond the partnerships and the 35 different agencies that are in this, and the intelligence analysis and training and resources, we focused a lot on what we needed to with that overprescribing going on, and investigating, you know, doctors that are pushing these pills. And there's some things that have occurred with this. One, we've been invited into a lot of hospitals and spoke to packed rooms of doctors about this. And, you know, I take that as a good thing, because, you know, when they see what we're doing with this and we're talking about this with them, you know, hopefully they're, if they were in a gray area, they're not going to go down that track. And we've done some investigations, and we've talked about these, and arrested a number of doctors, some of whom were, well, one of whom was trading prescriptions for sexual favors, and, you know, others who were destroying lives. And, you know, and we talk about it and focus on our investigations in these areas. And what we're hearing from this is some doctors are leaving and going other places, and others are more careful. And if they're more careful, and then less people that start with pills to go to heroin that end up dying with fentanyl. And you know, I give Tanya a lot of credit on this. She spent 13 months in a grand jury investigation looking at this in our community. She had people from all walks. She had parents, she had doctors, she had experts in all kinds of areas come in and try to work to give some recommendations. And the grand jury did a report that looked at statewide online treatment databases, looked at warm handoffs and mobile response units, looked on more collaboration and shared data collection, looked at pre-arrest drug courts and how we could do things along those lines. So that's something we put on our website and we've talked about a lot, and it has led to some good changes, not just in our community but in Pennsylvania. Now I want to turn to an area that we've put a lot of focus on, and this is where Tanya's going to kick in, but also Paul. So I have 50 police departments in Montgomery County, and we have a very good law enforcement community, that partners in almost everything we do. I have gone to the chiefs and said, hey, I need help. We need help to address what we are facing here. And so a number of the chiefs gave us detectives and gave us detectives to work with Paul and his team. And now what we have done over the past couple years is investigate every overdose as a homicide and try to work our way through that to see where it was coming from, in an effort to save other people's lives, because maybe that person is going to distribute that to the person next door or another one of their customers and cause more death, but also to hold them culpable for what they have done. And we have a statute along those lines. Now, one of the things that we've seen with this, and I'll, before I turn it over to Tanya and Paul, is that they sometimes come in a little bit different category. Okay, there's the category of the boyfriend and girlfriend or husband and wife that are using together, and one of them dies. All right, so you have that category, and we look at that on a case-by-case basis a little differently than some of the others. And on the other end of things, what we see too often is a dealer who isn't a user and wouldn't use because they're just out for making money. And they're peddling death and they're going down these tracks, but it's about greed. It's about them making money doing what they're doing. So, that is the other category. And then you have kind of this middle region that is a little more difficult. And they are often the folks that are users, but they're selling because they're doing it, as part of their habit. And you look at these and you look at the circumstances around that, and we look at them, on a case-by-case basis to make some of those prosecutorial discretionary calls that we have to make, when we are deciding how to address a case, how to charge it, whether we negotiate something as we go through. So I'll give it to you.
Good afternoon. So, as many of you know, there has been a shift in many jurisdictions around the country, like Montgomery County, to address the opioid crisis by targeting dealers and distributors of opioids and other drugs that causes the death of another human being. And although pursuing drug delivery resulting in death charges may not work for all jurisdictions, it can be a helpful tool in identifying and prosecuting dealers and distributors in an effort to create a deterrent and to try to turn the tide of opioids flowing in our communities. We have found it successful in Montgomery County in that we have had several cases where the dealers and distributors who were charged have cooperated with law enforcement and have provided other actionable intelligence that enabled us to go up that chain of supply. We have also found it very successful in the fact that it brings a sense of closure and some justice to the victims, the mothers and the fathers who have lost their children, the brothers and the sisters. And no matter what happens in the courts, no matter what charges are ultimately brought in these types of investigations, what's important to them, they understand that their loved one will never be brought back. But what is important to them, even aside from their own grief, is that the persons who are distributing and selling these deadly, deadly substances are going to be stopped. I will tell you that myself and Mr. Steele and Lieutenant Bradbury have sat on the opposite side of a table of mothers and fathers who are grieving for their lost ones. And when we tell them that we are charging an individual who had made money off of the addiction of their loved one, and being able to tell them that they will no longer be able to do that for a very long time, that goes a really long way. And if you ask me if that's success, I would say yes. Now, while drug-induced homicide laws have been on the books for a considerable amount of time, there has been a shift in light of the epidemic, and across the country there are 25 states that have drug-induced laws, homicide laws, on the books, including Pennsylvania. States who don't have that specific charge can still pursue these types of investigations and prosecutions by using other types of homicide laws, anywhere from ranging from felony murder to involuntary manslaughter. And the classifications for punishment range from anywhere from first-degree murder to manslaughter, depending on your jurisdiction. I get to talk about the case law that supports some of these statutes. So the seminal case in the United States is Barrage versus United States. And in this case, the defendant's conviction under the federal statute of the drug-induced homicide was reversed because the expert at trial, the forensic pathologist, could not say to a degree of medical certainty that the drug that was in their system, in that case heroin, resulted in the defendant's death. And as a result, that conviction was reversed. But what's more important, this case establishes what is called the but-for test that are in many, many jurisdictions. The majority of jurisdictions around the United States that have drug-induced homicide laws follow the but-for test. And what that is but for the defendant supplying the drugs to the victim, they would still be alive. And this, as Lieutenant Bradbury will explain to you, requires a part of the investigation where you're showing that an individual who delivered drugs to the victim did in fact die from those drugs. Some of the other charges to consider in these investigations is possession with the intent to deliver, delivery, manufacture, acquisition by fraud. We in Montgomery County do not see manufacture and acquisition by fraud as often, but they are possibilities for charging. In Pennsylvania, drug delivery resulting in death is codified at Section 2506 of our Crimes Code. There is no mandatory minimum for this charge, however, it does carry a statutory maximum penalty of 20 to 40 years in jail. But to give you an idea of what the guidelines are, if someone had a 0 prior record score, the standard guidelines would be between 5 and 6.5 years if someone would either pled guilty or was convicted of that charge. For someone with a more significant prior record score of a 5, let's say, the good standard guidelines for that would be 8 to 9.5 years. Now, the elements of the offense in Pennsylvania is someone who intentionally administers, dispenses, deliver, give, prescribe, sell, or distribute a controlled substance to another person, and that person dies as a result of using that substance. And here, I'll talk about this later, but death must be at least recklessly caused. These are the elements of Section 2506, drug delivery resulting in death. Traditionally, there have not been many cases over the last course of, if you asked me 10, 15 years ago, from counties around the state that actually pursued these types of charges. But in light of the epidemic, it is being used as a tool. And in Montgomery County, it's one of many things that we are doing already. But there has been some case law. I would suspect now that these cases are being investigated and prosecuted and some are going to trial, we're going to see more authority from our appellate courts. But some of the more important cases are issues that across the nation they're facing with regards to these types of charges. The first one is combined drug toxicity. What we find in almost every case, that the victims in this case have multiple drugs in their system. Does that affect the proof of the case? The Pennsylvania Superior Court in Commonwealth versus Proctor, this was their issue. Whether the court erred in instructing the jury that the final element in the drug delivery resulting in death is that a person died as a result of using the substance, even if other substances were found in the system. The defendant in that case raised this issue and said, because there were multiple drugs found in the system, they could not pursue this claim. However, the court found that the final element in drug delivery resulting in death is the but-for test for causation. That was addressed by Barrage versus United States. The fact that the decedent had other drugs in his system is immaterial as to causation when the heroin level, in that case, was at a lethal level and was a direct and substantial factor in the death. So what does this mean? If you have a case that you're investigating and the forensic pathologist and the toxicologist tell you that there are multiple drugs in their system, the case could still be pursued despite the other drugs, as long as the drug that was delivered by the defendant was in fact the drug that killed the individual. Another case that addressed our drug delivery resulting in death statute is Commonwealth versus Caccacan. And there they challenged the constitutionality, claiming vagueness with regards to that. The two issues were, does it fail to identify the requisite mens rea for establishing guilt? And does it fail to clearly indicate the requisite level of causation for the, quote, result of element in the statute? And the court held, and this is very important, is that the requisite mens rea for establishing guilt is intentionally. It is not intent to kill. It's the intent to distribute the controlled substance. Again, it is not the intent to kill. The mens rea required is the intent to kill, the intent to deliver the controlled substance to the victim. The result of was the section, the language in our drug delivery resulting in death statute, and the courts, the Pennsylvania Superior Court said it's equivalent to the but-for test that was put forward in Barrage versus United States. So the question is, but for the defendant selling the victim, in that case, a bundle of heroin, the victim would not have died of the heroin overdose. That is the issue. That is the question that through your investigation, your experts, your toxicologists, your forensic pathologists would have to give you an opinion with regards to that. The court went on to say that the dangers of heroin are so great and well known that the sale of heroin alone is reckless. The courts basically in this case almost took judicial notice of the fact that when you sell heroin, it's such a reckless act and it is foreseeable to cause death. So that foreseeable, reckless requirement with regards to causation is met just by the fact if you show through your investigation that they intended to deliver the controlled substance. Another case which affected the statute and how it's applied in Pennsylvania is Commonwealth versus Story. And here the court examined the statute in relation to the chain of supply between supplier and the end user. Here, the defendant claimed he was not responsible for the victim's death because he never met the victim. This is a situation where there was a supplier who delivered to a dealer, and I think there was actually 2 dealers involved before it even got to the victim. So the supplier was saying, I never met the victim. I should not be held criminally responsible. But the court disagreed, finding that the defendant's lack of knowledge of the end user was immaterial, and held that the statute requires only that another person dies as a result of using that substance sold. Again, if your investigation shows beyond a reasonable doubt that the drugs that came from the supplier to the victim, who may be 3 or 4 people removed from the supplier, the courts have held that you can still pursue drug delivery resulting in death or a drug-induced homicide charge. Other charges to consider in Pennsylvania are the charge of involuntary manslaughter, which is a misdemeanor, punishable up to 5 years, and third-degree murder. For third-degree murder, and I know other counties have lodged that since 2016, requires a finding of malice. Malice is not an element for our drug delivery resulting in death charge in Pennsylvania. Again, the only mens rea for the DDRD charge is the intent to distribute and the finding of reckless conduct. And we already know that the courts have found if you sell heroin or fentanyl or some other deadly controlled substance, that in and of itself is reckless conduct. The forensic pathologists and toxicologists are very important to these investigations and prosecutions. These investigations are not simple, they are complex, and they're costly. We in Montgomery County have the support of our coroner's office. We work with both toxicologists and forensic pathologists in these types of cases when assessing whether or not to charge. And as I noted earlier, the but-for test is very important on whether or not an expert can support their opinion by their analysis of the case. A coroner, for example, after he conducts an autopsy and looks at the toxicology report, who can analyze what was in this person's blood. Let's say there was fentanyl and 3 other substances, but the individual may have had a heart issue or some other organ issue where they could have died also from some other non-controlled substance issue. They have to make a decision whether or not they can say in court as an expert to a degree of medical certainty that if it wasn't for the fentanyl, this person would still be alive. But for the fentanyl, this person would still be alive. And that's not always easy. These cases are difficult. They're very expert heavy. Some counties, I traveled around the state with some of my colleagues in the Pennsylvania District Attorney Association, and we heard from a lot of counties on what they're doing in these types of cases. And some counties are just using toxicologists. Some are not pursuing them at all. And again, as I noted, in Montgomery County, we're using both the coroner's office and the toxicologists. Another thing to highlight, and I know Mr. Steele had talked about this, is that we are forging partnerships in these types of investigations, not just for drug delivery resulting in death, but in identifying and prosecuting those who are trafficking for greed. And we are working with our federal partner here in the Eastern District of Pennsylvania. We have several prosecutors who are designated to prosecute as assistant U.S. attorneys. And there is a federal statute with regard to distributing controlled substances resulting in serious bodily injury or death. And the benefit for that, I would suggest, is that through that coalition, the prosecution of drug offenses in the federal system typically enhance cooperation by charged defendants. It usually provides better tools for rewarding cooperation and often leads to targeting large-scale drug trafficking organizations both domestically and internationally. Mr. Steele had talked about the case that we had in Montgomery County. That started in one of our townships in Montgomery County by an individual who was receiving shipments from China. But the Pennsylvania State Police did a fantastic job doing the investigation. Our captain of our narcotics unit, who is designated as a federal prosecutor, is currently working that case with the federal prosecutors. And again, they were able to identify where it was coming from China. And the benefit is that they're working with not just the traditional drug law enforcement agencies like the DEA or the FBI, but they're working with National Homeland Security, the Postal Service. And they're able to bring down this whole network that was being facilitated on the dark web, and it all started in Montgomery County. So there are benefits of working with our federal partners and really trying to turn the tide and going after those drug distribution networks that are really providing these types of drugs, these synthetic fentanyl, and now we're seeing, as the Lieutenant Bradbury would be able to talk about, prescription pills that are being disguised as prescription pills, and they actually contain fentanyl. It's a very scary thought.
Tanya, can I kick you in for a sec? One of the interesting things, I found in the investigatory aspect of that is they were tracking where through the postal and Federal Express and some of the other, where were the packages going out there? And then they were researching obituaries, like for overdoses. And were able to start establishing this in different areas of the country and the effect that it had. And that was part of how they were able to build from there. So it's just something to be thinking about in these distribution chains.
And again, many of these international cases have local ties. So with that, I'm going to pass this over to Lieutenant Bradbury. Yes.
Good afternoon. I am honored to be here in front of all of you today. As you can see, since 2016, we have investigated, that number will actually be 364 overdose deaths. We've had 2 this week. With them, we've charged 22 persons with the drug delivery resulting in death charge, 5 with involuntary manslaughter, beyond numerous with possession with intent to deliver and other related charges. And you may look at those numbers and say, well, your batting percentage isn't very good. And I'll make the counter argument to this and reiterate with what Tanya and District Attorney Steele said. Of those 364 families which I speak to, they just want closure. They just want to know what happened to their loved ones. And when we don't charge them, at least I can tell them, okay, this is what happened. Sometimes I can't, but sometimes I'm able to. We believe that this happened, but we can't charge for this reason. And that goes a very long way with the families, because again, all they want is closure. They want to move on, because as all you know in this room, everybody in this room has somebody either in their family or their close family who has somebody suffering through this. And you can imagine if you didn't have the answers to give them. So that's why that's what District Attorney Steele has told us to investigate these, and that's how we do them. They are very difficult cases to prove, and that's why we treat them as homicides from the beginning. If you don't treat it as a homicide at the beginning of the case, it makes that much difficult going forward. As District Attorney Steele said, we have a great partnership. We have what we call loaners, which are local police detectives that come in that team, and that's all they do. They investigate the drug delivery resulting in death cases. This is to illustrate a young lady in a very wealthy township in Montgomery County. The sad part of this story is she lived with her elderly grandfather, and when he had no idea this was going on upstairs in the room. As you can see, there's probably thousands and thousands of heroin fentanyl bags in this young lady's room. So we do have a policy on investigating these cases, and as I said, the initial response and the collection of evidence is so paramount. And the phone. The phone is the key to these cases. As everybody knows, everyone does everything on their phones, and when we're able to get the phone, and then if we're successful enough to get into the phone, that's where we've been most successful in the prosecution of these cases. We have, a lot of times, we'll take over the dead person's phone, we'll act like the deceased, we'll order up immediately from the dealer, we'll get them to come as soon as they can. What that does is hopefully they bring up the same baggie, the same stamp, or more importantly, this is what's in that bag. As everybody knows, we just had a case where a young lady died We took over the phone, we started buying from the dealer. We bought from him 3 days in a row, same stamp, but every bundle of fentanyl that we bought from him had a different substance in it. It ranged from straight fentanyl, it ranged from acetylfentanyl to cocaine and fentanyl. So it was important to buy that from him immediately and trace it back to him. And then lastly, finding the witnesses and taking statements. And that's very important to do with the family members to find out where the person's going. For those who are local, it's not going to be a shock that most Montgomery County residents do go to Philadelphia, to the Kensington area to get their heroin or fentanyl. That's starting to change a little bit because it's so cheap now. No one buys heroin anymore. Nobody buys heroin. Heroin is a thing of the past. It's now fentanyl. Everybody wants straight fentanyl. You can buy a bundle of heroin in Montgomery County right now for $60. That's about 10 to 13 bags. Last year it was about $120. It's just not there anymore. The heroin supply isn't there anymore. It is all fentanyl. Why? It's the better high. As District Attorney said, of our numbers are going up this year, unfortunately. We've opened up more investigations than we had all of last year, and I would say 99% of them involve fentanyl being in the drug. We now see fentanyl in methamphetamine, we see fentanyl in cocaine, and that's why the deaths have gone up so much. The last thing I'll touch on is what District Attorney Steele and Tommy were saying. And this has been in other jurisdictions. We are just seeing in Montgomery County, and they are basically counterfeit oxy pills. So you look like you're buying an oxy, it's imprinted, you cannot tell the difference. You look at it, you think, oh, I just bought an oxy off of somebody, and what it is, it's fentanyl pills. These pills are coming straight out of Mexico. It's more prevalent in other areas, but we're seeing it in Montgomery County, and unfortunately, it's probably going to contribute to more deaths. And then getting back to the phone, it's the stuff, the normal stuff you get in investigations, the text messages, looking at the Facebook Messenger, the videos, grabbing videos from locations. Anybody want to take a guess where the most overdoses occur in Montgomery County? What establishment, retail establishment? Wawa by far. Wawa parking lots and Wawa bathrooms are where it's not even close. So we go out and gather that evidence to track down the meat so we can get back. And then finally, the call detail records and also the GPS locations, which are so important to putting the dealers meeting with the victims prior to the sale and death. I will say these are not easy cases for a lot of reasons. I explain it to these people when people say, well, yeah, they can't be that hard. Well, they are in this. If person A shoots person B with a gun, well, you know what happened, right? Person A used the gun to shoot person B. Not that they're simple cases, but it's pretty clear cut what happened. In these cases, there's so many different layers to them. You have forensic pathologists, you have toxicologists, you have multiple drug dealers, you have people who use multiple drugs, you have people who have the multiple drug dealers that they're buying from. So there's a lot more that goes into these cases, but it's the reason that we do investigate all these cases are for people like this. The families that we can go back and say, okay, we were able to make an arrest for the person who sold the drugs that killed your daughter or your son. And if we cannot, at least we can say to them, here's your closure, this is what happened.
So one of the things that Paul touched on, and I don't want to gloss over it, is what we're seeing in the different substances, and same dealer selling to 3 different times to an undercover, and each bag is different. And I use that when I'm talking to kids about the dangers of this. This isn't like going to the grocery store where you can see ingredients that are on it. You don't know what's in there. You don't know what's being put into these, and it's killing people. And the other disturbing aspect of this is and we see in cases where people know that a certain bag or the bags that are being sold in an area are killing people. And instead of going away from that, they go to it, because that must be the really strong stuff. And it's so counterintuitive to folks that want to live, but these are the realities of what we're facing. We put some faces up here, and the fellow in the middle, I'll touch on for a minute, because his father was very vocal about his death and the reasons why, and ended up working with the Inquirer to really get the word out on what happened. But it's important. It was part of our grand jury report. This was a young man who was a lacrosse star, and he got injured in high school and started taking some pills. And it was a situation that then happened again. He went on to college, and he played lacrosse in college and had another knee injury. And this time the doctor prescribed it and said, get ahead of the pain and start taking it. Well, that led to addiction, which we see again and again, and we see this in our drug courts and all those. Where did it start? It started with pills, and then went to the heroin, and then people die from fentanyl. And it was also a family that had a lot of resources and did everything they could through rehabilitation and sending him to programs and working with them. But it wasn't enough. You know, and that's the aspect of this that you hope and you pray you can prevent in any way you can by getting the word out, and that's why we're out doing these preventative programs. But for a family to come home from vacation and find their son dead on the bathroom floor, tragic. The lives lost through this, and each of these folks, and we talk about them, and their parents come with us to do these programs that I said are very, very hard. They're very difficult for these folks, but they do it because they're hoping that someone else won't have to go through what they've gone through. And again, I reiterate, I think that's the most effective part of it. We'll have a police officer in uniform with a body bag, or us talking about things, but it's it's somebody who is a parent that has gone through this, and unfortunately too many young people being lost to this. Young lady on the bottom left was in the hospital, and her dealer was bringing it to the hospital, and she died in a hospital of an overdose. So these cases come far and wide, and they are something that we have focused on. And I think one of the things that has come from that, and this is parochial, is that we have heard from a lot of folks that they don't want to deal in Montgomery County because of what may happen to them. And I'm okay with that if it means saving lives, because that's what this is all about, and that's what every single one of these programs that we're involved with is about. And it's about deterrence, but it's about prevention. It's trying to make a difference here. Before I take questions, I'll put up a note that Tanya got from the family of one of the victims. So it does mean a lot to them to be able to know what happened to their children. All right, questions on this happy topic? Not one. We covered it all. Great.
I know in our area in Washington, Seattle area, there's such a a dearth of law enforcement? Like, they're just trying to hire like crazy. How did you get these agencies to say we're going to dedicate detectives to do this work, to get them on loan? That's pretty remarkable.
Yeah, so, we heard the lecture about statistics and things. Well, we keep a fair amount of the numbers on things and working through this task force to be able to identify, where all the overdoses were. That became very important to them because, they can support that in their areas to say, all right, we're going to dedicate an officer to this, and then it's not just us investigating it, it's this team. And it's this team that is really, really good at what they do. I mean, they're a homicide unit. They go in, they know what they're looking for, they know the questions to ask, they have the technical background to get the search warrants on the phones and do all the different steps. And so, by talking to our law enforcement community about that, we've had people dedicated. And then once they got there, a lot of them had stayed longer, and their departments have kept them on longer because they see the difference that they're making. And then I make a really big deal about it. I mean, we do law enforcement awards, and I identify them and I bring them up and I talk about what they've done, and we have more people signing up, and unfortunately we need that because I was so hopeful that we were going in the right direction, but as Paul said, like this fentanyl aspect has really been difficult this year, and what we're facing, and all of those deaths. So that's why we're looking at other things, and I would love to hear any other programs that other people are doing along these lines, and to do it in front of everybody. But if you can tell me, because I'm willing to try just about anything to try to make a difference here. There's another question, sir.
So, obviously one of the controversial local issues where you see a nexus of prosecution and opioids is the issue of safe injection facilities, and you get, a U.S. attorney and local prosecutors on different sides. I'm wondering if you could say something about how you, as, you mentioned in your presentations, the role that Kensington has as a distribution hub for us. Help me understand how you think about that issue.
Yeah, it's not easy, and I come back to the point that I've made throughout this. How do we save lives, right? Like, and how do we look at this, and what are we going to be able to do to save lives? And I'm willing to partner with anybody to do that. I partner with our defenders and our defense bar on programs. We're standing together. At programs, and people are like, well, aren't you on different sides? No, we're on the side of saving lives, and with our partners in every place, and I don't profess to have the right answers to this, but I can't not try. Like, I got hired to do a job here by the people, and and this is about public safety, and this is about saving lives. So that's what we're working on. Yes, sir.
Hi.
How are you?
It's good to see you again.
Good to see you.
Okay. I really like the presentations you all made, and it's a very tough problem, opioid crisis.
It is.
Opioid addiction. And I think it's important to also think in terms of vision and wisdom. And a very commonly talked about concept is tough love. So we have the tough part, but we also need the love part. And I don't mean it in some kind of a namby-pamby idea of love. I mean it is a sense of vision. And the vision, an example of vision is life, liberty, in pursuit of happiness. The difficulty is we don't know what happiness is, although we are relating it to national productivity. and gross national happiness and such ideas. But there's also the question of liberty. So liberty is about freedom, and freedom needs a free society to be possible. The question is, a free society is a conundrum, because society cannot exist without caring for the other. But if you are free, why should you care for the other? So how do you have a free society? How do you have liberty? How do you have peace? And that's I would suggest for that 2 examples from the history of ideas. One is
John, we
Hobbes,
better have gotten him on the
and the other is
microphone.
Locke. So that's
Questions?
the question is, why care for the other if you're free not to? Why care for the other if you're free not to do so? Because that is the conundrum that is a free society.
All right, so let's go to the love part, right? You know, on how we do this, and I think that is something, and we identified it when we were, looking at the grand jury report. How do you do a warm handoff for the police in that circumstance? How do you get a program that takes somebody and does not put them into the system, right? Gives them an opportunity to not have a record, to not go down that track. And I think those are all things that we're trying and we're having success at. And this aspect of how many people you get arrested and then before they get to court they die from an overdose because of what they're suffering. Well, we got to do better with finding them a bed, and if they're willing to go at that point, then we got to get them there, and we have to do better on long-term treatment. That's what we're seeing with drug court, and that's where the successes are. And the short term, we haven't seen successes with the short-term treatment. So we need more funding. We need to go down that track to do more for people, and that's partnering, with folks as an association. We say every time, long-term treatment. We are for long-term treatment, and we will keep beating that drum because that's how you keep people from going into this never-ending, bowl that's causing death. Yes, sir.
To what extent are you able and willing, under state law, to go after pill mills and doctors that overprescribe opiates versus leaving it to federal authorities to investigate and prosecute such cases?
We're doing them. Like we've done them. We've partnered with that, and we used some of that as resources to work these cases. But we've got an assistant district attorney in our office named Jim Price. He's terrific. He's looked really closely at these issues. He understands them. They're complicated, but he's doing a really good job. He's also cross-sworn, so we've taken a couple federally. But the expertise on both the detective level and these, and I've prosecuted these cases, and usually when you get to that point, it's people that are not doing exams. They're walking in, they're paying cash, they're getting a prescription, and they're walking out. We've been doing search warrants on some of these doctors' offices, and there's people standing outside saying, "I need my prescription." There's police there, like with uniforms on, and they're still trying to get in. So that tells you about this addiction, and yeah, we're working them and working them every day. Yes, sir.
In Cape County, I understood your program. You're talking about new programs.
Yeah.
And I would like to believe this is part of our success. We were the only county in South Jersey that had a drop in overdose deaths in the last year. So a year and a half ago,
Congratulations.
I took a large van. It was like a bread truck, but it's more of a first responders truck, and I had it outfitted with heat, air conditioning, a little mini kitchen. It's fully stocked video, and it goes. We have organized places called the Hope One Van where we'll go in hot spots, and it'll be advertised, and I'll have a detective in plain clothes, the Hope One outfit. I'll have counselors. I'll have people that can place them in rehab. We train and give out free Narcan. We provide toiletry kits for men and women. And we try to get people, either people themselves that are addicted or family members, and we'll train them in Narcan, and we'll immediately get on the phone. There's an 800 number if they're uncomfortable having us do it. And we've literally placed people on the spot by getting them to sit down and think about it. And then also what we'll do on a really hot day or a really cold day, we'll go to hot spots because they know they can come in and get either cooled off with something to drink and eat or warmed up, and then try to convince them to go in and get help. So I can't sit there and tell you I did an analysis and that is in fact why it went down, but since we initiated that program, and it's very well received. We get retailers to let us park it out front, transportation centers, wherever I'll even take it to a senior center event, and when we talk about surrendering drugs, just to let people know when they see that, if they have a family member or know somebody who has an addiction problem, they can send them there or they can get information from us.
That's great. So for, I guess, anybody watching, it's more like a mobile crisis unit.
Right. And we have faith-based people, we have the local hospital, we have every facet of people that may need whatever somebody needs to talk to or whatever aid they need.
That's great. That's great. Yes, ma'am.
I had a question about if you had any wisdom for me, or anybody had any wisdom regarding diversion. We do typically do our deferred dispositions. I assume that somebody pleads guilty and then after some amount of time, I don't know how other jurisdictions work. But a typical deferred disposition with a diversion has, to this point, required somebody to engage in drug and substance abuse treatment, substance use treatment. I've been grappling with the idea because we have this huge disparity in treatment models in the state, and with new information coming out about MAT treatment and how mortality rates plummet using MAT, how success rates are much higher using MAT, that we've been thinking about maybe instituting our diversions requiring people to use MAT treatment. And of course, we haven't done that yet, and I've had opinions from different sectors. I was just wondering, in your opinion, since you're doing this work every day, what you think about that, requiring MAT treatment versus other models of treatment that don't include medication.
So you're from Maine.
Yeah.
I don't know what MAT training is.
Oh, sorry. MAT is medical assisted treatment. So Suboxone, buprenorphine, or methadone, some sort of medical stabilization, and other treatment along with that.
Yeah.
Sorry.
That's okay. And we've also looked at that, and our prison has been going down some of those avenues with things to try to get people in treatment with it. So, are there programs that you can, work with diversion to try to try to get people going in the right direction here? I think that's been, one of the things that we, identified, early on, at least in our system, to try to have places available, and when we do, and we can divert somebody before they get into the system, like our Deat program, where the police hold the paperwork, they don't file the charge, so it's not somebody that is going into the system there, but they're required to go down a track for treatment, and I don't think, I'm not going to say that there's one way to go, because I think, different people respond to different types of treatment. So, will we take different forms? Absolutely. Like I'm not going to be beholden to one method, because different things work for different people. So I applaud you trying something, in this way and going down this course, because you'll save lives, and like Cape May County. Anybody else? In the back.
So I just want to take a second to dispel a myth, because I think it's a fear-based myth that is in turn causing more fear. So far as I know, there has not been an officer who has overdosed from fentanyl. I know this is a contentious issue, but oftentimes because of fear, what we will see is a panic-based response when somebody thinks they're exposed. If If you talk to toxicologists and other people who deal routinely with fentanyl, they'll tell you it's not possible to absorb that amount of fentanyl in that way and overdose. If it were, people would simply use fentanyl that way instead of injecting it. So I just wanted to put that out there because I think it kind of self-propagates, and that is leading people to experience that fear-based response because they think they can overdose from fentanyl in the air.
All right, well, we could tell you about some cases where we caught a fellow who was packaging it up and, and overdosed on it and ended up in a hallway, and that's how we got on to him.
And I've read the same reports that you have on the fentanyl exposure. The only thing I would add is that in the situations that we're talking about, they're using the word fentanyl, but when it's tested, there's xylazine, there's other chemicals in the fentanyl that's causing the overdoses. But I will submit that there's studies out there that say the fentanyl itself, but I think you have to look past it, not just the word fentanyl. What else is in the substance?
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I do have a question. So I'm just kind of interested if you're tracking sentencing disparities and looking at the proportion of cases that you bring that are families and friends, because from what we do know, what's available, there are racial disparities in sentencing for these types of charges nationally. And Pennsylvania is the leader in this particular type of charge. The top 4 counties nationally, some of the top 10 counties nationally for this charge. And then the second question would be, how do you think this relates to Good Samaritan laws, which again are in the interest of saving lives, which you're interested in? So do you think that fear of prosecution in these types of cases reduces the likelihood that people will call 911 to get a first responder to their loved one or somebody that they're using with?
Yeah. So the first question is how we're tracking these. We are tracking each of the cases and have been pretty public about that and the discussions of them. And we actually do a release each time we bring one of these cases, and that's an effort to deter and get the word out that we're doing them. But what I'll say to you on them is they're looked at individually, each case, and there are times where we have victims of this, and there is no one there for those folks, and so we're the only voice for them. But race does not play any part of this, and it should not. We are looking at each of the cases based upon the facts of them. We've had a really wide range of folks that have been involved with it. One of the things that we've seen actually is a lot more women than we typically see in the criminal justice system that are involved in delivering drugs and going down that track. As for Good Samaritan, we're promoting Good Samaritan all the time because if it's saving lives and going down that track. Now, when somebody is overdosed and died, it's not applicable in that scenario. I'm done, all right? Yeah, mate. All right. Thank you.
Thanks very much for that thoughtful and multidisciplinary thing. The only thing I would add for DA Steele and for other of you to think about, the Quattrone Center is working with the Bureau of Justice Assistance and others to do what we call sentinel event reviews, so reviews of unintended outcomes in the criminal justice system. The very first one we actually did with DA Steele when he was first assistant in Montgomery County. We're wrapping up a pilot now in Minneapolis where we look at opioid-induced fatalities, and we bring together public health agencies, first responders, the police, and others to look at individual cases that get selected by the jurisdiction to see if there are procedural or environmental things that we can change, and if asking some different questions might lead to some new opportunities to improve the system. So if that's something that anybody would be interested in talking further about, there are obviously HIPAA challenges and other things that you need to think about when constructing the process to do that, but it may be another avenue, another experiment that you'd like to consider.
Can I blow smoke?
Yeah, please.
So, you know, this came out of failure in our office, and we went to John and a number of his colleagues to look at, you know, how we can put checks and balances into our system. And what we were able to do with that is create a position in our office called Professional Standards that, you know, is somebody who, in not every case, but many cases, we give a case to, and he's not been involved in any part of it, so that he looks at it with fresh eyes to make sure that, you know, I's are dotted and T's are crossed, and we've had a lot of success in that arena. And he's the guy in the office that's also, you know, evaluating things when there's been suppression or something has gone wrong in a case, to try to deal with things on the front end, because we never want to be in that spot where somebody has been convicted and we're looking at that 10 years down the line, and like the fellow that spoke up earlier has been in prison for a long time.
Thank you. So we're going to wrap up today, and I hope to see you all in two places. Tomorrow, we hope to see you here. We've got as great as today's agenda was, I think we have an equally good agenda tomorrow. We have Jamila Hodge from the Vera Institute talking about racial justice. We have representatives from the city attorney in Seattle and the King County District Attorney's Office to talk about a really interesting domestic violence firearms surrender program. And we're going to wrap up with Stephen Talpins from the Miami-Dade State's Attorney's Office to talk about community intervention programs. So we hope you'll all be here again tomorrow. We can promise you the same, even a better breakfast, and the same hourly CLE that we were promising previously. So hopefully all those incentives are aligned. But right now, even as we speak, weeknight at Bernie's. So we're going to have, if you go out the front door of the law school that you came in, so up the top of the stairs, around to the front door, and diagonally across the street to your right is a wonderful neighborhood pub called Bernie's. And we would invite you to come hang out there and enjoy each other's company on us. We'd love to see you there. I think the verb that was coined by one of the forensic lab guys in New York was collegiate. So we would love to see you collegiate at Bernie's, and look forward to that. I want to thank our speakers for a really thoughtful presentation.